Hello, my name is Matthew Pfeiffer. Thank you for joining Toxic to Triumph. Today I have on a very special guest, Brenda Barros Rivera out of Houston, Texas. Technically, Cypress, Texas, but we have been friends for quite some time at this point, at least virtually. We haven't met live yet. She is a content creator, she's a coach, she is a consultant. And the reason why I love Brenda so much is that she helps people identify narcissism in the workplace. You hear me oftentimes talking about narcissism in terms of a romantic partner, oftentimes in a family setting, but narcissism can be very prevalent in the workplace dynamic as well, and it doesn't get talked about very often. For those of you who have been followed me for a while, some of you may have attended my conference at McAfee this past in 2020, and you know that I talk about this within a context of a workplace dynamic. But we need to have this conversation at a much deeper level. So I'm excited to have this conversation here with Brenda. Brenda, I'll let you introduce yourself so I can do you more justice. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Very happy to be here with you. And as you said, you kind of got it right. I'm a content creator at Create Safe Relationships on Instagram. And I got interested in this topic really because I had this experience prior to my experience of this. I was in a PhD program for organizational behavior and human resources. So it was a management PhD program. Um, and I ended up having to leave the program as a result of this experience. So it's been a very painful experience. But there's been a lot of lessons learned that's why I decided to open up this page. I want to be able to share with people so that people can know early on what they're getting into. If you're in the middle of it, here's what to expect. Here are some things that you can do to help protect yourself. And in terms of healing also, because there's a lot, even though this is not a personal relationship, a career, especially in the United States or in a capitalist society, is a big part of your identity. So when that is impacted, there's a lot of mourning and loss that happens, and grieving that has to happen in order to be able to move forward. So that's what I'd love to talk about.
What a lot of people don't understand when it comes to a workplace narcissist, sometimes that can actually be worse than dealing with narcissism at home or within a family. And the reason why is because you actually spend more time at work than you do at home. And so
Absolutely.
where you hear me talking so much about going no contact or low contact with a narcissistic romantic partner, how the hell are you supposed to do that when you work with them? You're spending 40, 50, sometimes up to 80 hours a week with this person. And if it's a narcissistic boss, if it's a narcissistic supervisor, they're in control of your finances, which we know when you're enmeshed with a narcissist, that's dangerous. Can you talk about that a little bit on number one, identifying narcissism in the workplace, and maybe even a little bit more about the enmeshment and dealing with them in the workplace?
Yeah. So how do I identify them in the workplace? So I'll tell you a little bit about how it began for me, because I think this is possibly what can happen in different situations, right? Like, love bombing is something you tend to think only happens in romantic relationships, but it was actually something that happened in my own relationship. So the person who abused me in a narcissistically patterned way was my dissertation chair. And the way that it works in our program is that you pick your chair depending on what your area of research is. And interestingly enough, this person's research was organizational justice,
Wow.
including interpersonal justice. So FYI, just because somebody does like talks about good treatment and seems to be emotionally intelligent because of what they talk does not mean they live the life, FYI. So, but the way that she picked me, there were two things that now I know to be red flags. At the time, I experienced them as odd, but I didn't know what they meant. Like, it was like I was looking at a piece of the puzzle, two pieces of the puzzle, but I didn't have the big box to tell me, oh, that's where this fits in. It just felt like, what? This is strange. So the one thing was that there was a big rush. She tried to rush me to become her student. And in our program, typically the student requests the professor to be like, can you be my chair? She came to me and asked me to be her student. So that was it flipped the script, and there was a big courting component to that, and it was very rushed. So she said I needed to make the decision within 3 days because we were going to have a conference.
I think that I find that very, very interesting because I warn people so much about rushing into relationships. And when I
Right.
say that, people assume that I'm only talking about romantic partners.
Right.
And you're rushed into this decision. And people, it's important for people to understand the reason why narcissists and toxic people rush during that love bomb phase, because they don't want it to stay in the love bomb phase. They want to move over to the evaluation phase, which makes them feel more powerful, and they create enmeshment. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I'm sure that's where you're headed. I just wanted to chime in real quick about that. The enmeshment that once you made that decision.
Well, so yeah, well, in the seconds, I just want to make sure I say so the rushing and then the love bombing, you are the best student in this department. That's what we all want you to be our student, but I wanted to get you first, right? So now, but mind you, flattery, I'm really happy to say, has never been something that's really swayed me. So it wasn't something that I was like, oh my gosh, I am special, therefore I'm no, it wasn't that. It really was the reason I ended up choosing her back was because we had so many similar. So for one, she wanted to study justice. I'm very, very, I care about justice. She was studying racial justice and gender issues in the workplace, issues that have been very important to me. She's also, I'm a mom, wife, my mother-in-law lives with me, and she helped me take care of my kids because it's a very Latino family thing. And
Mhm.
she was too. And then my mother-in-law suddenly passed away the week of finals on my first semester in PhD program. I had a heart attack and she died. And so I was the only Latina in the program and the only woman by that point who had children. Everyone else was like either they didn't have children or it was men whose wives stayed home. So I felt very lonely and not understood, by anybody else. So she stepped in. She was the same demographic profile as I, daughter of Colombian immigrants, wife, mom, and her mom was just moving in to take care of her kids. So I felt like, okay, somebody like I can connect to somebody who understands my own life and I don't have to be explaining everything to them. And I think, and then finally, yeah, so those are the reasons that I chose her. Now, in terms of enmeshment, like what was different was I wasn't, part of me was emotionally like, once she started acting up really terribly, I didn't want to make her look bad because um, I don't like to make people look bad. Um, I like to be collaborative. I like to have high agreeableness. But really, what made it even more difficult is that in that culture in the PhD program, if you leave your chair and go to another person, it's almost like a divorce, but you can't get away because you're seeing the person every day. So I'm walking past the hallway every day of the person who I rejected. So I was really trying to avoid that happening because it was going to be awkward, uncomfortable. And she had already also, because this was a narcissistic system and she exploited it to the max, she had started, by the point that I tried to get away, she had maligned me to every other faculty member and turned them against me. So by the time this whole thing went down, I had already been a PhD student for 2.5 years, and I had passed my comprehensive exams with really high scores. And I was the first student in 3 years to pass the test in my area. And so that helped get me grounded with the other faculty. But because it was a narcissistic system, and many of them have narcissistic traits, unfortunately, they would prefer to listen to the voice of one of their colleagues than to their own experience of me. So they tended to believe her, right? Until like once everything went down and I was able to explain things, then a lot of it became clear. But the system is what it is. And whenever I ended up leaving for a year, they put her in the committee for PhD students. You're talking about making the fox watch the hen house. Like, and so that's what solidified for me, like, it isn't just her, but she was able to get away with it because of the collusion that they all did as a result of being part of that system.
I'm hearing people. I, I'm hearing people. If they were live in this chat with us, I could basically feel them asking the question, what does abuse look like in this type of setting in the workplace dynamic? I think
Mm.
that people have become more accustomed to domestic violence and what emotional abuse looks like at home, or
Right.
maybe even with, with a friend.
Hmm.
But when we talk about a workplace dynamic, what does that actually look like?
I would say one thing is ridiculous expectations. So, expectations that if you were to mention them to anyone else in the same position, they would kind of raise an eyebrow. You know, I think exploitation is another one, like forcing you to do ridiculous amounts of work in limited amount of time. Another one is hypercriticality. So, like, everything you do is nitpicked, everything is torn apart. And then on top of that, your intentions are somehow they mind read you. Or they think they're like, well, you did this because of this, and clearly you don't care about me. And like those kinds of things happen in the workplace. Um, then also, slandering you to other people, to other supervisors, and it's very purposeful. Like, they know who to talk to. They know who the power players are, who are gossips as well, and who will feed into this, and they know who they're not, and so they won't talk to those people in particular. Isolation is another one, and that's part of where the whole slandering comes, is to isolate you from the workplace so that you then have no support in your organization. So those are the kind of things that I would look for. And then there's the verbal abuse, the emotional abuse, like, um, by telling you, like, for instance, telling you, oh, predict you're going to get bad evaluations because X, Y, or Z, and a lot of this involves projection. Like, my former chair told me that I was going to get bad evaluations because I was rude, when that is what happened to her. I got an award for teaching before and that semester that she predicted I was not going to do well. So a lot of it's projection based, so that it becomes very, very abusive.
And you mentioned how she began to talk about you to other faculty, other staff,
Mhm.
which obviously creates a lot of abuse by proxy. What did that look like once word kind of spread around? Was it, did you witness her talking about you to other people, or was this a feeling that you had when you started to engage with other people?
This was initially a feeling I had. And I knew was happening because one of the faculty members, the only one I had up to that point confided in about what was happening, he started acting differently because, and that's when I realized, oh my gosh, he is one of them too. He's a covert one. He started working on a project with her, and so I originally was working on a project with him. So he really valued me because I was very hardworking. Then our project was scooped by someone else. It got published. So now we couldn't do anything else with it. So he had no use for me. And he started working on a project with her. So then he started acting weird with me, like saying, oh, she's not as bad, and blah, blah, blah. Things that before he used to never say. Before he was like, oh my gosh, I didn't want her to get hired because, like, I was so worried how she was going to treat students. And now we have our star student who's discouraged and blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden changing the tune to like, oh, she's not that bad. And like, it was weird little things, microaggressions. Like, I walk over and they don't smile and say hi anymore, or they're really rough and gruff in their approach with me. And he was the one who was the gossip. So he's the one who started spreading things. And so other faculty members who had higher standing started also doing the same thing, like in conversations being very hostile and aggressive and harsh with me. And like, I'm already being worn down by this abuse. So that really hurt me to see all this other stuff happening. And so then when I finally spoke up, that's when I realized, yep, he's spreading it, but it wasn't from him. It was from her. She knew who to tap into. She was more of a introvert, introverted. I would not call her covert narcissist, but still not a grandiose narcissist,
Right.
and malignant, very
Mhm.
malignant. And but she was able to tap into the covert gossip, covert narcissistic gossip, who then spread all these things. And so I was able to then talk to some of the faculty members, and they confirmed for me what was happening.
When you were going through all this, I mean, so I imagine it led to a major impact physically, mentally, probably, possibly financially, possibly, probably. I can imagine that had a major impact on your grades. I mean, with people I work with, you have this feeling like you're walking on eggshells. A lot of times people start to when someone pulls into the driveway, that sort of thing. They have certain feelings that they have.
Hmm.
What does that look like from a workplace dynamic? The impact that it leaves. Do you still have that feeling like you're walking on eggshells when you're in that system? What does it look like in terms of a victim?
Yeah, so it was a lot of fear, anxiety to the max. Um, and it started impacting my physical health. I got to the point where I was not able to eat or sleep anymore. I lost within a month, maybe 40 pounds. Like I was terrible. I was doing terribly. My heart, I started having a lot of vertigo. So I went to the doctor and he realized that every time I stood up, my blood pressure dropped substantially. And so I would have to sit down to keep it stable. It was just, I started losing a lot of hair. Like it was impactful in so many ways. It impacted my ability to finish one of my courses, so I had to drop that course. When I returned to school, I took another course to make up for that one. But um, it impacted my ability to concentrate, and I'm so glad that the real impacts, like the severe impacts, because there was impacts all along, but the severe impacts didn't take place until like December of 2016, which is at the end of the semester. So I had already done a really good job with my students, and that's when I got an award for teaching. But I think had this started earlier in the semester, I would not have been able to perform. I wouldn't have been able to grade. I couldn't focus. And yeah, definitely. Anytime I started avoiding her office, and then I started having issues a few months later with panic attacks, even walking into the building or even checking my email. Anything where something had happened to me, like and substantially, I had a hard time going there.
It sounds like it was you were experiencing some CPTSD.
Yep, it was CPTSD. I didn't know that. I had never even had anxiety before, like clinical. So I was like, what is happening to me? Why am I crying so many hours? Why am I can I not walk in? I thought I was lazy. So I started waking up at 2 in the morning, see if I could get more work done. And I could not focus. So right. So the whole like reading literature about narcissism ended up like I read so much about narcissism and then about trauma because I was like, what the hell's happening to me and how do I get over this?
I was just
Yeah.
about
So
to
with
ask that, like, because with people who are experiencing this from a romantic setting, a lot of
uh-huh.
times they begin to Google the behavior
Right.
that they're experiencing from their significant other, from their ex, and then leads them down this wormhole and leads them down this foxhole that all of a sudden it's like, well, why am I dealing with the silent treatment? How do I handle the silent treatment? And then next thing you know, all this stuff about narcissism pops up. How did you realize that this was actually narcissism and not just, I mean, because I'm assuming this was your first PhD program. I mean, and how did you, what brought you down the path of narcissism?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think um I Googled up. So with the first semester I was a student, I won an award. It was a national writing award for human resources, but it was not connected to my PhD program. And I wasn't planning on sharing it widely, but I wanted to share with the people who were special to me, like my chair, right? So I shared it with her, and initially she was happy for me. And afterwards, though, I mean, she seemed like furious, telling me that it was a waste of my time. And mind you, this was a $20,000 cash prize for first place, and my co-author
Wow.
that. You're telling me that was a waste of my time? Like, and so she started minimizing and diminishing, and then she started like piling, the work up on me, and so I Googled that up. Like, why can't somebody be happy for my well-being or my success? Like, so those were the kind of things I started Googling up. Or like, for instance, one time we had a disagreement because we were talking about whenever you submit a paper from publication, like there are certain criteria that are going to be looked at. And I taught writing. I have a bachelor's and a master's in English. And so I had taught writing before. I knew that I had rubrics for my students' papers. So I wondered if for publications for academic journals, there was rubrics that we could check for, right? So I had a conversation with her and she said, no, that doesn't really work because every single paper is different. And so I was like, oh, really? You think? Well, I was thinking maybe like, maybe there's like a rubric that might exist. And she was like in that moment, there was three of us in the conversation. One of the persons turned around to get water and she like glared at me with this horrible look in her eyes. And she said, you have no critical thinking. You're just like, and then she compared me to like one of the worst students in the program, you
That's
know,
triangulation.
and I,
And, you know, I just want to point out that that's triangulation, the same way that, and the reason why, well, I was going to say I didn't mean to cut you off. I actually did, but only to point out to the listeners that triangulation exists with all narcissists, even in the workplace, where if you're dealing with this from a romantic setting, they're comparing you to their ex or to their new partner. If you're the ex, and in your situation, she was comparing you to another student, another faculty.
Mhm, mhm. And so, absolutely. So she did that, but it's also the intense flip. Like, and so when my friends came back to the conversation, it seemed like nothing at all had happened, so it was just really, really bizarre. And so I started looking that kind of stuff up. And the triangulation also happened with another student where, like we would have research meetings and we are talking about, the data we're collecting and what we're finding and as we're analyzing the data. And I would make a point and she would say something like, "Oh, well, blah, 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 blah," and like totally tear it up and then turn to the other person and say, "Oh, well, what do you think?" And be really amenable to what she's saying. Of course, by the next week, everything I had said was now part of the plan. But the previous week, she had torn me up about it and made it look like the person who was next to me knew more than I did. So it definitely caused, and of course, this other person was a good flying monkey. So, I was like, nope, you too. Like, I see you. Like, you're not trying to help me out. You're like enjoying and relishing the fact that I'm being, bombarded by this kind of stuff. So that's the kind of stuff I looked up on the internet, and that's how I came across narcissism. And you're right, like most of the literature talked about, of the lay literature was talking about romantic relationships, but I was able to say no, but this is happening even with me. And part of it too is like there was an element of possessiveness. Like if I were trying to talk to another faculty member, she would interrupt the conversation.
Wow.
It seemed to be almost like a little bit of like possessiveness, and there was little elements of sexual harassment as well. So I feel like because of all those things, I was able to see the literature, the lay literature, and Google it up and say, okay, this is not romantic, even though there might be some elements where she might be trying to interject that into this, but this is definitely what's happening.
When when you're working with someone that is a client of yours, or even in your own personal experience, so and someone is experiencing this, and it's a narcissistic system,
Mhm.
what do you do?
Well, you have to play smart, be very political. I was reading yesterday on a couple of concepts like the quiet ego and the light triad, as opposed to the
Hmm.
narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. You cannot be your best self. Okay, like being your best self and trying to say like, no, I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt, or I'm not gonna talk bad about them. I'm gonna like, we're all humans. Stop that bullshit if you want to survive. You cannot do that. You have to be political. And if you don't want to be political, get out because you're going to get hurt. Like, this is one of those, if it's like, if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. Absolutely one of those things. And I feel like that's ultimately what I decided to do. I cannot play those games. It is like, I can't stomach it. And part of it is I was so traumatized already. I think maybe now, if I were to go into a new place, I might be able to pull it off a little bit better. But at that time, I couldn't and I don't want to, be there anymore. Um, so like figure out who the power players are, try to gain their favor. Okay. Don't if somebody talks bad about you, shoot that down, even if it makes the person who's talking bad about you look bad. Like you can't be worried about them. They're the ones who are trying to hurt you. Okay. So if you want to protect yourself, you can't be like, oh, well, I'm going to keep quiet so that I don't hurt them. No, they tried to hurt you. This is offense now. You got to stop with the whole like trying to be like, try it. Wrong place for that. You know, also document everything that happens and talk to the supervisor, to their supervisor, because it's one of the things that narcissists, like at least at work, what I've realized, they can try all sorts of shit, but they don't want their pay or their job to be jeopardized at all. So if you but this is similar to like the Book of Fear by Gavin DeBecker talks about how whenever people perpetrators are going to try to commit murder, they'll be like, don't scream, and nothing will happen. No, you're supposed to do exactly what they tell you not to do. That's what you're supposed to do because that's what's going to protect you. They know this. And her case, right? She was like, don't talk about me. Don't talk bad about me. Like that's exactly what I should have done. I should have gone straight to the supervisor and said, here's what's going on, department chair, this. But she had no qualms in talking about me to the department chair. And she had much more power than I did, And so I feel like those are the kind of things. Document, get your evidence, like speak up, defend yourself, talk to the appropriate, powers that be. And if even those powers are not going to protect you, then you really need to think about being in another job. And you need to get out before you get so traumatized you can't function.
Right. And you brought up a good point in terms of that they want you to do the opposite of what you were supposed to do.
Yeah.
When we're talking about narcissists, that's one of the features that they're looking for when they find their targets. They're looking
Hmm.
for someone who's going to comply, right? And
Yes.
someone who is not going to set boundaries, who's not going to stand up for themselves, and is going to basically do as they're told. But even doing as you're told is not necessarily going to keep you safe from their
No.
wrath, from the devaluation. And regardless if we're talking about a workplace dynamic or romantic setting or a family dynamic, it's still love bomb, devaluation, discard.
Right. And I do want to make a point though, because I feel like a lot of times we take inappropriate responsibility for some of these things. And I've had like years now to think about this because at some point I think I did think I needed to take more responsibility. And then I realized, yeah, there was a part that now I know how to protect myself better. But you have to understand people who are going to be con people or exploit, they're good at what they do and they exploit normal social norms so that the person that is completely taken aback. For instance, one of the norms that we have in our society is reciprocity. For instance, if you go to a store, I don't know if you've ever been to a store where there's double doors and you hold the door open and then the next door, like let's say you hold the door open for a person, that person walks in front first, then they hold the door open for you. That's a norm of reciprocity. If
Mhm.
you sneezes and you say bless you, you're expecting, oh, thank you, you're welcome. Like these are the norms of reciprocity that we have been conditioned. And this is not codependence. This is simply being a normally conditioned person in our society. And people who are narcissists and Machiavellian and psychopaths and all that, they know these norms and they're going to exploit it. So let's say that you say, like, hey, can I borrow $5? And you're like, yeah, because you know they're going to pay you back. And that next time if you need it, they're not they have already set themselves that they're not going to do that. So they know what the rules are, the unwritten rules are, and they're going to make sure to violate them. So like it's important to realize this, like it isn't even just about having poor boundaries, it's about being normal. So certainly poor boundaries doesn't help, and we need to firm our boundaries and like know what our non-negotiables are and be a little bit more prickly, quite frankly. But if you're the kind of person who's more laid back, you don't take things to heart so easily, they're going to exploit that, and you're going to be exploited in ways you didn't even know you could be exploited. You didn't even know you had that to be taken from you. So I just think I want to make sure to point that out, like it's not all codependence or poor boundaries, it's exploitation.
Yeah, I agree 100%. That's a great point. Can you tell us where to find you? Obviously, you're all over Instagram. I absolutely love your page. One of my favorite pages to follow. Um, but tell us a little bit more about where to find you. Are you also on LinkedIn at all?
You know, I'm not on LinkedIn because most of my faculty are on my LinkedIn
Oh,
page. or my
okay.
work page. So this is a little bit of area that I'm having to figure out. Like, actually, this week I've been thinking I need to go and like delete everybody because so I can speak freely. Because she's still, a very
Yeah.
important person in our field now. You know, and so I'm on Instagram, like I said, create safe relationships, on Facebook, create safe relationships. And I love your page, Wounded Healers. Like
Mhm.
I love seeing all this interaction. So sometimes I'll go in and chime in. So anyone who's there, my name is Brenda Barros Rivera. So you'll see me instead of like I'm not from my page, I
Right.
joined from my personal page. So that's where I'm at. And of course people can message me if they want to have a consultation or just ask a question.
So, for those of you who are not in my Wounded Healer support group, that's what she's referring to. On Facebook, I have a support group. It's completely free and it's specific for people who are experiencing narcissistic abuse. and are recovering. And it's just it's just a group of men and women who are sharing their experience. It's a completely closed group, and it doesn't matter what type of abuse that we're talking about, whether it is with a romantic partner, a workplace dynamic like what we're talking about today, or if we're talking about a family member. It's just a place to go share your story in a safe environment where it's completely closed and everyone can literally just help each other. That's the reason why it's called Wounded Healers, because I didn't coin the phrase wounded healer. But everyone there has been wounded in one way or another, and they're literally just helping each other out. And I always say that you need three different type of people in your life when you're recovering from this. You need someone who's been there, done that, and then telling you what they've experienced and pulling you up. You need someone that's right in the same area that you're going through, that you're cheering each other on, and someone that's going through something that you have been through and you're helping them out. And so when you have those three people, you can see tremendous growth, not only with yourself but with others as well. So Brenda, thank you very much for hopping on. We appreciate it so much. This was very informative. We're definitely going to have to do this again sometime soon. For those of you who want to hear a funny story, we actually tried to do this a year ago and it didn't work out so well because neither one of us, or mainly me, I invited her on. I didn't have the infrastructure at the time to be able to do this the way that we're doing it now. So thank you very much for having us on, or for coming on, and we'll do this again soon.